and welcome to Dialogue. As the UN turns 80, it faces unprecedented pressure, geopolitical rifts, widening divides, and shrinking budgets. Can it still deliver on its mission with fewer resources? How can the world safeguard a UN-centered multilateral system? And with the US pulling back from global commitments, what's next for sustainable development? To answer these questions and more, I'm glad to be joined today by Peter Thomson, UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean and the 71st President of the UN General Assembly. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to Dialogue, Mr. Thomson. If you look back, say, the past decades of the UN development, how do you see the role of the UN, especially for those who are not following the UN closely, in terms of its core mission of maintaining peace and stability? How has the UN evolved over the past decades?
Well, I think it's fair to draw a direct line between 1945, when the United Nations was created, out of the ashes of the Second World War, through to today, and recognize that we have not had a third world war. There were two world wars last century. Well, that hasn't happened this century, and I think you can credit the United Nations for that. You can credit the United Nations for the fact that it saved hundreds of millions of lives through its humanitarian work, through our agencies like UNHCR and World Food Program and UNICEF looking after the children, WHO looking after health. So we've been very successful in delivering on that front. It's a one-of-a-kind meeting ground for humanity, where all 193 nations get together, and sure, they let off steam, and they also reach compromises and consensuses, which there is no other international forum which is universal that they can go to. So I think it's proved its worth down through the decades.
Mr. Thomson, how do you characterize or sum up these most pressing challenges confronting the UN today?
We're faced with the situation in Gaza, with the situation in places like Sudan. So that's a very difficult resolution in all three cases. But all we can do is call better understanding, give peace a chance. We're there to help with peacekeepers, with negotiations. The UN is always there as a medium for peace. So that is what we can do there. And I really can't emphasize more how important that is for the United Nations. And that every person that spoke, every leader of every nation called for the UN to stay the course in our peace and security responsibilities.
But at the same time, Mr. Thomson, some critics argue that the UN has been sidelined in conflict resolution, for example, in Gaza or Ukraine. What's your response?
Well, that's the reality of the situation at the moment, that the parties involved have chosen it that way. But as I say, the UN is always there as a mediator. And a choice not to use the good offices of the UN is in my view, a wrong path.
In the recent UN General Assembly, we hear this kind of a similar criticism, like those from President Trump of the US. In his speech, he dismissed the UN as irrelevant and wasteful and criticized its work on climate change and migration. Do you think these criticisms hold water?
Well, as I say, the Secretary General said, you have a choice between a world which is governed by just raw power, or a world which is governed by laws and by multilateral cooperation. And I think we all know what the better path is. Multilateral cooperation. We've had plenty of examples in human history where we just go down to, the worlds of raw power. That usually means, invasions and wars and suffering. So, no, we don't want that path.
So are you suggesting, one of the biggest challenges of the UN is choice? What we have seen is, the failure, for example, of the international law. In some cases, countries are conducting international relationship based on raw power instead of the international law. And what should we do, or what can we do to make sure the UN remains the center of international politics?
Well, I think the reality is that the UN is always going to be that. It's the only way we have got that is universal, where 193 countries can come together and sort things out. Yes, there will always be big powers, bigger powers. Some would say great powers. But the fact is, the majority of us are just small countries, or we're medium powers, so we all have to get together at the table and sort things out, because this is one planet, one people, and there are huge challenges out there. So how else are you going to do it other than getting together around the big family table of humanity? And the big family table is the United Nations.
Well, another urgent challenge is resources. The UN budget is under pressure, let's be frank, partly due to the US late payments of its share of contributions. According to some numbers, the US owed the UN over $3 billion as of September 2025, including $826 million for the 2025 regular budget assessment, and also outstanding arrears for past years of unpaid peacekeeping commitments. And how big is this financial pressure on the UN right now?
Yeah, we are in a bit of a financial crisis at the United Nations, not just the US. And a lot of countries have not met their contributions in full. So the big call is for member states to pay up what they owe, pay on time, and we will not have a liquidity crisis. But having said that, we have recognized, the Secretary General has started an initiative called UN 80, the United Nations 80 years old, which is going to seriously look at how to trim our costs. There's going to be something like 20% of costs cut away by next year from our budgets. And look, I personally haven't seen a bureaucracy anywhere that doesn't get bigger and bigger and bigger as it develops, and perhaps develops some bloat here and there. So after 80 years, I think the idea of having a reform of the system and the bureaucracy, it's timely. And we'll make the necessary cuts so that we will be more effective, more efficient, and can deliver more with less. I'm very confident about that. And having seen what is going on under the UN 80 initiative, I think the UN will be in a better place to deliver on its mandates as a result.
Yes, with that in mind, people will wonder if countries, some of them, continue to withhold payments. Is there any way the UN or the UN General Assembly can do something to, make the case to them? You need to pay so we can do a bad job.
Well, the main thing is to show that we're doing the reforms, I think. Whether it's a company or whether it's a corporation or whether it's any organization, the shareholders, the ones who are contributing the funds, want to know that they're being listened to and that the changes are being made by the Secretariat. So we're doing that, and I think when the changes are made, we will see those member state funds starting to flow in so that the new budgets can be met. It's always going to be difficult with the system that we have of voluntary contributions drying up a bit as well, but altogether I do believe as a result of these funds that we're going to be able to deliver more at a lower cost, and that the member states, if you like, the shareholders of the organization, will see the benefit of that and will pay up what they owe.
Mr. Thomson, tell us more on how has this financial crisis affected the UN Sustainable Development efforts, particularly in ocean protection, which is your primary focus?
Yeah, I think where we're seeing the biggest effect actually is on the humanitarian side. The development side is more the responsibility of national states, but on the humanitarian side, if you look at things like World Food Program and on UNICEF's work with children and so on, there's a lot of suffering going on there as a result of these cuts.
You mentioned about UN reform. In addition to the UN 18 initiative, people also talk about, say, one of the key features or part of the UN Security Council structure is the 5 permanent veto-wielding members. This reflects this geopolitical reality of 1945 when the UN was founded. So people will ask, is this structure still fit for purposes in the 21st century? And what are the most significant consequences of the ongoing deadlock over its reform?
Well, there is a constant call for the reform of the Security Council, and it is one of the top priorities for reform of the United Nations. There's also, of course, the reform of the UN General Assembly, and there is a very effective committee which operates, when I say a committee, it's all the member states are part of it, called the revitalization of the UN General Assembly. But you put your finger on it. I mean, this is 1945. This is the ashes of the Second World War, when the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, who were basically the victors of the Second World War, took up their veto powers and permanent seats on the Security Council. Well, the world has changed so much since then. And obviously, Africa doesn't have any permanent place. And I won't single out countries, but there are many countries which I think do deserve to have some sort of greater role in the Security Council. So reform of Security Council, it's been an ongoing debate now for many, many years, but the time has come, if the Security Council really does want to be more effective, for that reform to take place. But meanwhile, you see power of the General Assembly growing all the time. And I have a lot of faith that even on peace and security, that the GA is the most important body of the United Nations.
Let's take a look at China. Chinese Premier Li Qiang hosted a high-level meeting on the Global Development Initiative, which is proposed by the Chinese side during this recent UNGA. The initiative is closely linked with the UN 2030 agenda. How will this initiative support the UN development goals? And what does it say about China's commitment to multilateralism?
I've always found China very strong on its commitment to multilateralism. And, I referred to what President Xi said in his speech at the Climate Action Summit, that multilateralism is the best way to govern our affairs on this planet. And who could disagree with that? Look, for me personally, because I'm an ocean man, and that's my prime work these days, is that making peace with nature is probably the most important peacemaking role that any government or any multilateral organization must face. I mean, wars cannot take place in a world where there is no nature, because without nature, we don't have a place on this planet. And that is not an exaggeration. We are, as you know, facing great environmental challenges. We are currently on a path towards 3-degree planetary warming by the end of this century. Well, that's a world on fire. And we have to make peace with nature. And that means coming back to that 1.5 barrier, which the best of our scientists have told us is the only way that we can really maintain the balance between peace, development, and good conditions for humanity on this planet.
Mr. Thomson, I think a lot of people agree with you, but at the same time, what are we seeing now is a reality that there are ongoing conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, for example, and also big power competition. Somehow, these kind of issues have become the priority of the international community. And climate change or the protection of the oceans, for example, are somehow being sidelined Is that the case? Is there anything we can do to refocus on the most imminent and direct challenges for humanity?
Well, the main response I'd have to that is that there's a kind of dichotomy out there at the moment. On the one side, yes, there's all that negativity, these wars that we see. There is the fact that and on the climate front, it's not good news yet. If you take the ocean, all the indices are very bad. Pollution, overfishing, ocean acidification. All the indices are bad. But that's one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is much more positive. There's so much more awareness now. Human beings are not living in the dark with others making decisions for them. We are all very aware of the situation in terms of climate change. We're all very aware now of the ocean and its problems. And that is not the way it was 15 years ago before the Sustainable Development Goals were brought in. So look at the results. The results are coming on a fairly regular basis. I mean, for the ocean, for example, we now have the BBNJ treaty ratified, actually. We've got the necessary numbers of ratifications from member states that we now have a BBNJ treaty. Now, what is BBNJ treaty? That's governance of the high seas of the planet, which is, half the planet. So that's real progress. We can establish now legally under international law, we can establish giant marine protected areas out in the high seas. We had also a few weeks ago at the World Trade Organization, WTO ratified the fisheries subsidies agreement. Now, you might think, well, how important is that? Well, it's very important. Something like $20 to $30 billion of public funds being put every year into subsidizing fishing fleets which go out and do illegal fishing. I mean, these are very positive steps that are going on and are improving the situation for that international governance of the planet that I was referring to. So there's this dichotomy, on one side there's all this negative stuff, but there's also very positive stuff going on too.
If you look at the SDG 14, Life Below Water, focuses on conserving and sustainably using the oceans, seas, and marine resources. Healthy oceans are essential for a healthy planet, yet they face unprecedented pressure. Climate warming, acidification, overfishing, and plastic pollution. Now, how high a priority is ocean governance for the UN today? And how well is it featured in the UN 80 initiative?
Well, it's a very good question. My response would be that compared with where we were 15 years ago, as I said, where there was not much awareness of the importance of us having a healthy ocean. That is not the case now. I think every corporation, every country around the world understands that now. The question is what we're going to do about it and how quickly. On that score, I'd like to thank China for two things. One is that China has this year signed the FAO's PSMA. What's that? The Port State Measures Agreement. This is our best weapon for controlling illegal fishing. I won't go into the details of it, but thank you, China, for signing. The other thing I'd really like to thank China for is bringing down the cost of solar panels to the point where, it's much more sensible now to invest in solar energy than another oil and gas well or something like that. China is making the green transition possible for the rest of us by bringing down those solar costs. And why is that important to the ocean? Because the ocean's number one problem is ocean warming. And of course, that's caused by burning of fossil fuels if you get down to it. So ocean warming is, the death of coral, which is a creeping thing that is happening. It's a creeping crisis around the world. We had the worst coral bleaching and deaths last year, and that's going to continue as the ocean warms. And to live in a world with no coral, which is predicted by scientists by the end of the century, you cannot imagine a healthy ocean without coral, because coral is 25% of the ocean's biodiversity depends on coral. And of course, a warming ocean also means the expansion of H2O, which means rising sea levels. And that affects 1 billion people this century around the coastal communities of the world, people living in river deltas or cities based on alluvial foundations, or of course small island countries, the atoll countries in particular are particularly exposed. So all in all, we have a big problem for the ocean, but it all comes back. Mm-hmm. Not all of it, majority of it comes back to the burning of fossil fuels. And we've got to make that green transition. As I said, as President Xi so correctly said in what he was when he addressed the Climate Action Summit, which is we have to stay the course and make the green transition to renewable energy. That is what the ocean would call for if it had a voice.
Mr. Thomson, you are the special envoy of the ocean. You have been working hard, talking to different people, different countries. But at the same time, we do notice, conflicts, geopolitical competition that somehow dominate the theme of international politics. Some countries or some leaders are even claiming that, climate change is not true, it is a fake. I mean, what do you have to say in response to this kind of claim? And what can the UN do to make sure the climate change is the theme of the international community?
I think I come from Fiji, and our neighbor Tuvalu, I was with the Prime Minister of Tuvalu last week in New York. We worked together on sea level rise. And it's just inconceivable to me that people would not understand the terrible predicament that Tuvalu finds itself in through rising sea levels. This is an atoll country. This is sea level rise is a reality. We have accurate satellite measurement from the beginning of the 1990s, which shows that sea level rise has come up 4 inches since the early 1990s, and that the rate of rise is accelerating. Terrible news for a country like Tuvalu, which is just atolls. And the other thing is, because of that global warming, which I referred to, you go out into the lagoons of Tuvalu, which, it's a coral nation. It exists because of the fact that coral has allowed those atolls to exist and allowed the people to live on them for thousands of years, that the coral is dying. And then to say that climate change is not real or that this is a hoax, it's very distressing for a country like Tuvalu to hear that. And so I would say that definitely we need stepped up action and ambition when it comes to strengthening national climate plans. I mean, this is something that all of us share, and it's not just one country's views that matter here. It's all countries. We've got to step up our ambition and our action.
Another related issue, many nations from Africa, Asia, and Latin America joined the UN after the initial 51 founding members. We have this decolonization movement. And then we have, seen this rise of the Global South, another movement. How have these movements shifted the political dynamics within the UN General Assembly and other UN bodies?
Well, I mean, it's all for the good, isn't it? The era of decolonization was where the UN membership blossomed, and that's made the United Nations globally representative. Before there were, less countries, and they would say, "Oh, we're speaking for X number of other countries that happen to be in their empires or under their control." But nowadays, no, the countries are independent and they can speak for themselves. That's what makes the United Nations such a valuable family table, as I say, that for all of them to come around. I think it's done nothing but strengthen the United Nations, having the Global South joining in.
Lastly, looking ahead to the future of the UN, we are now seeing growing discussions, both outside and within the UN about reform. From the outside, countries are calling for changes to bodies like the General Assembly and the Security Council. From within, there's this Secretary General's UN at 80 initiative seeking to revitalize the organization. So what's your outlook for the next 10 to 20 years of the UN? What kind of a role do you think it will play in maintaining global order, global peace, ensuring that international law continues to prevail in the international community?
Well, first of all, I think you're going to see, as a result of the UN80 reforms, I think you're going to see a stronger organization, because change is usually for the good, and everybody needs a bit of a wake up, and that's what we're getting at the moment. So I would say, what do I see in the future? I see a UN which is stronger. I see it delivering on the vision of the UN Charter in a stronger way. I see real world impact being the result, and because we're going to have a much more sharpened focus. So we'll be achieving more with less, actually. But in terms of real world impact, I think you'll see the results. As I said before, we need stepped up action, though, on climate change, because that is, to me, the underlying problem for you. Can't have peace and security and development without making peace with nature first. It's the absolute foundation for it. As I said before, this is one planet, one family of humanity. We've got to get around the table. The United Nations is the table. We're all in this together. But most importantly for me as a grandfather is that we're doing this for our grandchildren, because my 5-year-old granddaughter will be 80 at the end of this century, and currently we are on track for 3 degrees planetary warming by the end of this century. That has to change. Thanks to the Paris Climate Agreement, we have moved from 4 degrees warming down to a 3 degrees warming projection. But we have to get to 1.5 projection as quickly as possible, maintain that as a stable future for humanity on this planet, so that when our grandchildren get to the end of this century, they are living in a 1.5 degrees world, not a 3 degrees world, because that, as I said, is a world on fire, and it is unacceptable. So everybody needs to exercise their sense of intergenerational justice and do the right thing and make the transition to a renewable energy world.
With that, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks again to Ambassador Peter Thomson. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.